Once again, we're here at the Cult of Honesty, and tonight is going to be an awesome show. Not because we don't have other awesome shows, but because we have Dr. Shook, namely in the studio. And so, Dr. Shook, we do thank you for coming our way tonight.
Our network was completely horrible until you came, and everything is so much different now.
I was trying to bypass Joey, by the way, and he just jumped into the conversation and interrupted. And so you're going to have to push your weight around.
Pay no attention to him.
I mean,
sometimes
let's
people
you and me talk.
Don't like it when the flavor of the soup changes. I'm sorry to, but I'm really excited to be here again with you folks, and I think we're going to have a great show.
I think so, but the guys in the background keep playing with these buttons, and it makes feedback.
Yeah, we're getting some
and
sound out of the monitor here that needs to stop.
They like it for some reason. Okay, tonight the subject is faith, and we've had all kinds of things stated about faith this week, and I've got a lot of questions, but I'm going to save my questions now and turn it to Joey, because I think that Joey wants to start off the night with an amazing little feature, and so why don't you go for it?
Thank you. So tonight's topic is something that I have been speaking about thinking about for a while, and I started talking to Dr. Jones about this this weekend, and it just kind of we just kind of decided to make it into a Cult of Honesty discussion, and Christopher Mowdy chose the phrasing for tonight's topic, which I hope I do it justice. I believe it was without being a crutch, can having faith in something that does not exist be beneficial? And so I think that there's been a lot of discussion about this topic on the Cult of Honesty once the event was announced, and the topic was announced last night, I think it was, or yesterday afternoon. It just kind of broke loose on Facebook, and there's been a lot of comments on the event itself. A lot of conversation has already happened, and I hope we get some of that energy on tonight's show. But before we begin, I wanted to share some information and some thoughts that I've had on this subject for a while now. It doesn't have to be the direction that we go. I would like to just kind of blend it into the conversation, and then we can go from there. But one of the quintessential examples that I have thought of something that we must have faith in that does not exist, and by our very faith it does exist, and that example is currency. And this idea started turning in my mind because of a show that I listened to one time, and probably a lot of our viewers are a fan of this show, and that is This American Life. And you can listen to the show yourself. It's episode 423, and the title of the show is called Money is Fiction. And they spend about an hour exploring the idea of that, that most people think of money as a physical exchange, but that in essence it is nothing but a fictional story that has been made up, that is sold to the people, and once they believe it, it begins to actually work. And so I spent some time last night going through that show and kind of boiling it down into a few paragraphs of thought, and I wanted to share that before we get started and bring the Cult of Honesty in. So I'm just assuming that our hangout can hear me as I begin, but let me just read these few paragraphs here. Money is fiction. It does not actually exist until a story is told to us that we believe. Our modern economies are based on complex stories that have been made up by economic PhDs who understand what is needed to make people work together in a massive exchange of resources. But the integrity of the money we hold in our hand is no better than the faith that we place in it to work. Once we stop believing that it works, it stops working. When we believe it will work, it works. At one time, on an island called Yap, in the South Pacific, a pre-industrial people used something completely impractical and counterintuitive for their currency. They used massive stone sculptures in the shape of coins, stones that weigh thousands of pounds in a culture with no machinery to move them. This climate creates a financial innovation which is that you don't have to actually have the stone to own the stone. So the stone is sitting on a path, for example, and everybody just knows that you own it. If you want to buy something from someone, you give them the stone. The stone doesn't have to move. It just sits there on that path. But now everybody knows that it's someone else's stone. You don't own it anymore. The limestone that they used to make these giant sculpture coins wasn't actually found on Yap. They had to go to another island 250 miles away to make them. At one point, a crew had gone and cut one of these giant stones on this island, and they were bringing it back across the sea. When they showed up back on Yap, they told the people there that there had been a storm, and so they had to cut the stone loose, and it went overboard. The stone ended up on the bottom of the sea, and the crew survived. The people of Yap heard this story and said, "That's no problem. We believe you, and this giant stone on the bottom of the sea, it exists. It's still good money. Somebody can still own that stone that is sitting on the bottom of the ocean." And so the stone from the crew's story became a part of the Yap economy. We once used gold. Then everyone decided to leave the gold in a bank and use paper to vouch for it. The paper took on the value of the gold because we were told and believed that the person who owned the paper owned the gold. But then the gold disappeared and became nothing more than a symbol in the story of our economy. And the paper itself retained its value because our faith in the paper remained. Around 1994, during Brazil's greatest economic crisis, the economy was stabilized by 4 college drinking buddies, among them Edmar Basha and Andre Lara, who tricked the population into believing in a new form of currency that they made up. They wrote a fictional story. You could even say that they told a lie. The fictional currency unit was called the URV, and they convinced an entire nation to collectively believe the story they wrote about it. They explained to the people that no matter what happened to the real currency, the URV would always remain stable. They published daily tables in the newspapers, showing the fluctuation of the crashing economy and how it related to the URV, and how no matter how badly the real currency was doing, the fake currency was always stable. All products were priced using the URV so that people didn't have to change the prices of their products while the real economy constantly plummeted. The population had faith in what these men told them, and soon the currency that was made up in this fictional story became more real than the actual money that they held in their hand. The country's economic suffering went away, and soon their economy became the 8th most important economy in the world. Richard DeZena, a senior vice president of the New York Fed, describes the process in which the Federal Reserve decides, independent of any decision from any government official, even the president, whether there should be more or less money in the U.S. economy as a magical process. Gerald O'Driscoll, former vice president of the Dallas Regional Federal Reserve, describes the process as almost ceremonial. If the Fed decides that there should be more money, they just decide it, and that's it. They then go to the major banks and buy treasury bonds from them. And to buy these bonds, the Fed does not show up at the door with an armored car full of cash. According to Richard DeZena, and I quote, "Someone at the Fed just changes that number, adds a few billion, clicks a mouse." In a financial crisis, the Federal Reserve becomes what is known as the lender of last resort, in which it simply decides on its own to start lending money directly to banks and even regular businesses. The money that it lends did not exist a moment before it was lent, and would not exist if the people to whom it was lent did not believe it existed. David Kestenbaum, a science and economy correspondent for NPR, said, and I quote, "Whether you like it or not, this is our system. To empower a secret society of PhDs with the ability to create trillions of dollars out of nothing and hope we can trust them to get it right and stay as boring as humanly possible. Something from nothing made possible by the faith of the people." And with that, we will bring the, unless you guys have anything to add, we'll bring the Cult of Honesty into this discussion, and we'll begin.
I have something to add.
Okay, well, you are part of the Cult of Honesty, and so now we begin our discussion. And what's your name, sir?
Matthew Steele.
Hi, Matthew. Why don't you begin with your first comment?
The basic concept of the topic of the discussion for this show that Christopher told me was faith itself. But believe there are different kinds of faith. There is a faith that is held to be impossible to be not true, the object of the faith. And there is a faith where you take something for granted without having any rational basis for accepting it as true. But that doesn't mean that you hold it to the point where it can't be not true. Like, the difference being, if you can explain the rational basis for the thing that you have faith in, like this type of currency, which has a functional utilitarian use, then that is different as sort of something that has been created just basically based on someone believing that it's real, or something that you are telling someone else exists as part of their reality because you believe it's true. There's a difference there.
Matthew, I'm going to instruct our titler here that Matthew is typically spelled with 2 T's. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right, and mine is with 1.
All right. Oh, yours is with 1.
Yes, that's
okay.
right.
All right. I just got given a hand symbol from my titler. Okay, so everyone is welcome to jump into this conversation. If it gets too disorganized, we'll bring it back into order. To your comment, I would say I think that you're trying to draw a distinguishment between believing in something that is completely irrational and does not work, or rather having faith, and having faith in something that could work. To which I think that there is some ground for which I agree with you here. But I just want to emphasize the point that money does not work without faith.
I'd like to jump in on what Mike said as well, and extrapolate, because this is one of the issues that really bugs me about the way that especially the English language works in this instance, is that the word faith is used in many, many different ways. It's used as in trust very frequently. I have faith in friends, or faith that my car will start, or trust in an individual, or trust that things will go sort of the way that I expect them. It's also used for hope in many ways, in the same, things will go the way I expect them to. That would be, I hope my car starts. As a matter of fact, earlier today, I had the exact opposite happen. It's really cold here in Wisconsin, and I went to start my car, and it went drrrr. So that trust or that faith that I had in that failed me. But I don't think that those are invalid uses of the word faith. I just don't think that they are equivalent to that which I deem, for lack of a better term, religious faith. I think that religious faith is the kind of faith that is specifically a conclusion on an ontological question about an empirical, or I guess the ontological nature of an empirical existence of something. Insofar as the question of, does God exist? Is there such a thing as a God? That is an empirical question. That is an ontological question. That is not the same by any means as saying, do I trust that my wife loves me, or do I trust that my car is going to start? Now, plenty of people do, as part of their faith structure, hold beliefs that God will care for them, and that God will answer their prayers, or will in some way, shape, or form be a friend to them, or that somebody that they can trust and have a hope type of faith, or a relational type of faith with.
When you say God exists, can you tell me what the reference of God is when you say that?
Well, that's I guess what do you mean, the reference for God?
Well, grammatically, when you use language, words point to something. So when they say God will take care of me, what are they pointing to?
Well, that's just the thing. I can't make a blanket statement that will fit for even the majority of people, because there are so many different concepts of God. But any sort of anthropomorphic or entity, it doesn't even necessarily have to be anthropomorphic, but something that exists outside of and has power over our own universe, or our universe exists as part of it, but it has an intentional power over it, would be probably the most universal understanding of what it means to be a god. And if somebody's going to have a relational trust and faith in that god, or a hope that God will take care of them or do things,
So
they must first conclude that God exists.
Like Zeus.
That is the faith.
Like Zeus,
Presupposition.
right? Like Zeus. Is that
Right.
is that what you mean, or like
Zeus.
or like
I have an
Yahweh?
example.
Like Zeus. Zeus would be an example of a god. Yes.
Yeah.
I have an example to demonstrate. I think what we're agreeing is the difference in these two different types of faith is if you have a baseball player who is not, the team hasn't been winning many games lately, and this player puts on a certain kind of socks, and then they win. And then the player then believes that they won because he put on that pair of socks. So then he doesn't wash that pair of socks, continues to wear it every time, and they continue to win. It's a correlation and causation. Is it because he's wearing the socks that they're winning the game, or is it because there's a natural explanation? And I think that a lot of times what people are explaining is the functionality of God. What the God would actually do is something that is being attributed to God because they have a presupposition of faith, not because that God is necessarily actually doing anything. And say that this player stops wearing the socks, he decides to not wear them one game, and they lose. Well, then his faith is reinforced that he was supposed to be wearing the socks and wasn't. So this sort of structure of what you are and are not supposed to do gets built based on whether or not he's wearing the socks. And then he wears them again the next game and they win again. That still has nothing to do with whether or not the socks have anything to do with them winning the game. But it's
his belief in the power of the socks may have an influence on his performance and even
That's
the
right.
performance of the remainder of the team.
Right. I would say
But that doesn't mean
that
that the socks themselves are doing anything.
I would say that
Exactly,
in
and
both.
that's why I think the faith itself can be powerful, but that still doesn't mean that the object of the faith is true.
Correct.
I think, if I could, I think another good example of this is supplements, weightlifting supplements. A lot of them don't really do very much at all. They're just, it's just that you'll try harder because you're thinking, oh, I'm just so amped up on all these supplements and stuff, and so you'll try harder and maybe you'll see like a lot of results, but it's very, very minimal that any of this really has to do with the supplements, besides the fact that you're trying harder because you think that you're getting a better boost because of these supplements.
The placebo effect.
Yeah, placebo effect. Or an assisted placebo.
If I could return to Joey's point about money.
Oh, yeah, actually. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Go ahead, Ozzy.
Money is a medium of exchange, and the specific object that you use doesn't matter. It's kind of like a word. It doesn't matter if you use the word to or the word duo or the word do. They can express the same concept. Similarly with money, a lot of different things can serve as a medium of exchange. But money is an example of a social fact, what's sometimes called an institutional fact. And our whole social life, all of social reality, to borrow a phrase from John Searle, is made up of institutional facts where, provided everyone is carrying around the right beliefs in their heads, everything goes. Marriage is an example of that. Two people are married, well, there has to be an institution of marriage. Then the institution consists of people walking around with the appropriate beliefs. And then people, then we say, well, you have to undertake this ritual. Well, whether or not something constitutes a ritual of marriage depends on the culture you're in, which is to say people in a certain culture are going to have certain beliefs about what constitutes marriage. It's the same thing for an election. What constitutes an election? What makes the president of your country is that you're all walking around with the certain beliefs about that there is, for instance, such a thing as the presidency. Ranks and titles. When a judge pronounces a sentence in a courtroom, these are all institutional facts They're all products of people walking around with certain beliefs. So our reality is made up of brute facts, just sort of physical facts, for instance, as an example of brute facts. But our social world is made up of institutional facts. Those are a function of everyone carrying around the right beliefs, and things can go catastrophically wrong if there's a collapse of consensus.
Hey, Ozzy?
Yeah.
What distinction would you draw between the majority of our population believing that Barack Obama is the president and it being a fact because they believe it, and the majority of our population believing that Jesus Christ is the Messiah?
Well, the difference would be that I think most people recognize that the presidency is a social fact. They think that the president is the president by virtue of the fact that I'm not American, but let's assume I'm American, that we as Americans believe that we live in a democracy and that we choose our leader in a certain way, and the person was elected and satisfies certain requirements. And if it turns out that, if it turned out that he was not, an American citizen, then of course he would not qualify, and so it wouldn't matter that he got elected, right? He would be disqualified on those grounds if that were the case. So I think everybody recognizes that Barack Obama being the president or not being the president is in part dependent on the fact that there are certain institutions in place. But when people believe that Jesus is the Messiah, they don't think that that's a matter of a kind of collective agreement, and all of us are willing and agreeing that this is the case. No, they think, no, Jesus is objectively the Messiah. It's got nothing to do with us. It's more like a brute fact. So this has nothing to do with sort of what is the status of the evidence, whether the belief is warranted. These are different kinds of facts in the minds of people. They would say that the President of the United States is president by virtue of certain institutional facts being in place, and people having certain beliefs. But Jesus, whether or not he's the Messiah, is not a matter of whether you believe in it, no matter how many people believe in it. He would be the Messiah if no one believed it. I think that's where the difference would lie.
I don't see a difference between Messiah, president, in terms of the role that plays in terms of how we relate to it.
I mean, you could take the same example and apply it to a monarchy in which people believe that person is king regardless of whether anybody believes it or not.
Can I answer a little bit on this one? I don't want to take from
Certainly
Ozzy here, but I just wanted to say that the difference is there is a direct effect of our belief that Barack Obama is the president on his power today. If nobody recognized he was the president, then he would be a raving lunatic screaming, "I'm the president," and nobody would listen to him. The fact that people do listen to him is significant. Now, it doesn't matter how many people believe that Jesus Christ is the Messiah, because he can't put out any new statements or change anything. He's not alive right now to do things.
The fundamental difference, though, I think, is that anyone on Earth, given the proper time and money, could go take his hand. They could verify that he's real with their senses. They could verify that he's real by talking to him and hearing that he thinks and he has a mind of his own as a person, as a human being. And I don't think that the same claim can be made about Jesus.
Well, what about George Washington?
Well, I don't think that the question of the role of Jesus as Messiah and the role of Barack Obama as president is necessarily dependent upon the ability to verify their individual existence. I mean, yes, it is certainly significant if there is no such person as Barack Obama, and we think Barack Obama is the president. That's a problem. But I guess the role of president is what's more in question here, and the role of Messiah. And how
the whole notion of roles, though, are all social constructs, all of them. The role of Messiah, the role of president. Those are all social constructs, don't you think?
But wasn't that a self-assumed role, though? When it comes to the case of Jesus being the Messiah, isn't that something that we as a country have come together and made the collective decision to put Barack Obama into power and have these executive powers over our society? With Jesus, that's that's sort of a different concept, unless I'm missing something.
Well, people were tricked.
The ancient church fathers, as much as I don't really like a lot of,
we'll go on the assumption.
they dealt with this question of who Jesus is by declaring him.
Yeah,
in a sense.
people were tricked into believing.
I see it as it's just a different time and period and different domain, I guess. But to me, cognitively, the brain's operations in these are still using the same apparatus.
I think that may be true. Bob, why don't you make a few points? It sounds like you've been trying to jump in, and why don't you expand on some of your ideas?
Oh, it's just that I think that the behavior of faith, and by that I don't mean the things that we do because of faith, but the fact that faith is a thing that human beings are capable of having, regardless of the object of that faith, or the story that we tell, or how we came up with the story, or whether it's institutionalized or not. But the dynamic of faith is in some ways, I think, independent of how we might categorize the different sorts of things we put faith in, and of course, although I think that people of faith tend to express their faith to people who don't have it by trying to say things that justify it, I personally don't really know anybody who's a believer because of any of those reasons that they use to try to talk to other people in justifying their faith. Apologists try to rationalize, they try to explain their faith so as to be able to still maintain an appearance of rational intelligence. But I don't think even people who believe in Jesus come to that belief because, oh wow, these arguments made sense, and so they acknowledge, oh yeah, he is the Messiah. I don't think it happens that way. I think that whatever dynamics are at work, they come to this point where, like you see in the biblical text, where Peter says, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." This is a conclusion that makes sense to Peter for whatever reasons, and the dynamics going on inside of him that put Jesus in that role is and I think cognitively not that different from the when I walk out of my house in the morning, I realize I'm living in a country where Barack Obama is the president. Cognitively, I don't see a difference there.
Something that this conversation is moving my mind to kind of refine is the idea of what faith is. And I agree that we use these terms in all sorts of ways, but there's something that I have been unable to kind of put my finger on, and I think I'm getting closer and closer, and that is that we keep talking about how faith can mean many different things, but most of the time when we try to define it, we define it as trust. And even the idea of, well, I would say that the one definition that kind of gets furthest away from that idea is hope. But even that has a sense of trust. But one thing that I'm starting to come into focus in my mind here is that faith is a tool, and this particular usage that I'm talking about, it can be a tool that brings something that does not exist, is not true, and by its power can make it true. Now that thing may be a good thing for our society or our culture or our species, or it may be a bad thing. But it merely takes people choosing to believe something, and by that very belief, it becomes true. This could be currency. This could be somebody's muscles. This could be baseball. It could be the New Covenant group. Yes. Because the New Covenant group came into being by this very same principle. And there is an element of trust in that, but at the very beginning, it is literally believing in something that does not yet exist, and somebody merely has an idea, and they have faith in it, and it grows until it's real.
Can I ask a question? Is it belief in something or belief in each other that is the main engine going on? Because you talk about money or some concrete entity over and above human beings, but in order to get it started, like your excellent example with money, or we've heard some other examples tonight, the real trust isn't between the people and this thing, this noun. The real trust is, of course, between the people themselves. That is to say, by our just saying so, right, we're going to start behaving in a particular regular fashion depending on each other. And that's the kind of trust that's behind a lot of these social conventions and agreements, and that's how we build institutions. So that I think the reliability of each other and having confidence in that reliability, hey, I'm going to get $1 worth when I pay out a dollar bill, right? It's not my trust in the paper. The paper isn't going to help me out here. It's the person across the counter that's going to take the dollar bill, right? That's where the trust is.
Right.
We can say as a shorthand, I put my trust in money. But in longhand, what that means is I trust that any other person in my economy is going to accept that bill for an agreed upon value, and I'm going to be able to get my soda. That's what we really want out of life.
A soda.
Well, or whatever it is that other people are going to do for us. But here's the thing, though. We have to understand that it's we who did it ourselves. Now, somebody just raised in a money economy wouldn't of themselves give much thought to where all this money comes from. They just want the green stuff so they can get the sodas. But nevertheless, there is a story, there is a narrative that explains how people, us, are ultimately responsible for the creation of these social facts. Now, here's a twist for everybody to add to the story, because we don't yet have a story that can account for something like the erection of a democracy or of a religion. There are some kinds of social agreements where we have to ensure such a high, nearly perfect degree of fidelity to really keep it going and get the good stuff that we want, that we actually have to tell people we didn't do it. Now that's a whole nother layer, and human beings at some point, thousands of years ago, got smart enough with their stories to start telling narratives about how it wasn't human beings that are sustaining and responsible and right? All kinds of lovely things fall out from that. First of all, people feel like they have to be subservient to this thing because we didn't do it. We're not responsible. Second thing that falls out is we can't change it. We don't know what would happen. We don't know how it works in the first place because no one will explain it to us, right? It's external to us. Now we're in the realm of ideology. Some ideologies turn into nasty political systems or religions, and there's other kinds of isms out there. But that takes it to a whole nother level. And I frequently think that when people talk about faith in a negative way, they're trying to point to these kinds of ideologies where it's built into the system that no one is supposed to think that human beings are responsible for it. Now, from a more rational standpoint, we find that unfortunate because it sort of disempowers people, really. And what it does is it empowers certain people who actually know how it works, and it disempowers the masses.
Just to play off of what you're saying there, beautiful statement. But people can also mythologize other people and turn something that a person did into something that's much larger than them, and credit it to that person. That person may have never done it, but that person becomes such a mythological figure in the head of human beings that it is almost equivalent to what you're saying.
And this repeatedly happens over and over again. You study the histories of civilizations, histories of religions. You find stories of these great emperor kings. You have no idea whether these emperor kings ever really existed, but in a way that doesn't matter. It never really did matter, but they were responsible for founding this empire that's worthy of our respect and emulation. We don't actually need the nuts and bolts of how he did it. If he ever did, who knows? Who cares? We don't want to know. It's his shining example. And human beings need narratives around these powerful personas. They're personifications. When it doesn't really matter if they're actual persons. Just like in your example with money, we don't actually need to know what the dollar bill is made of. I can't even tell if they're really even made of paper anymore. They seem more plastic than paper nowadays. But it doesn't matter because it is, of course, what's written on it. It's the superficial stuff that's doing most of the work. And I think those can be very effective ways of quickly keeping a society, rowing at the same time and working together. But in the end, though, you got to make sure it doesn't take get taken advantage of, that people are made powerless by thinking that there's this thing over them that they have to obey.
Yeah, I agree.
Could I jump in here?
Certainly.
I kind of disagree about the object of the faith being irrelevant and being kind of just a vessel for people to have faith in one another, or that the faith in that object stems from the faith in one another, because it makes me think of like idealistically the founding of the United States, the ideals and principles that motivated that, I think, are what allowed people to sort of transcend the follies of being human beings and arrive at a place where they can have faith in one another, in that they have faith in those ideals. To have faith in an ideal that is decidedly greater than people. I think that's the thing, is that a lot of ideologies are by default greater than the individuals who hold them, because they are independent of any individual's mistakes or
and yet, do any of those ideals really exist? Is there really such a thing as freedom? Is there really such a thing as justice?
Well, I think that there is, and it's just that all we can do is limit them by attempting to describe them. That without our description, these things exist, and that when people gather around an ideal, will fight and die for an ideal, they're fighting and dying for something that does exist, but they're only making their best effort to embody it, to describe it, to communicate it. So freedom exists for all animals, for all of nature. It's just the default mechanism of the natural world. But when we introduce our conscious manipulation of those things, our societies and our people, rulers who can come in and remove those freedoms, then it becomes a question. Then we can entertain the idea of it not existing.
I'm going to give, I'm going to give my crew a quick instruction that when a video goes away on the Hangout, please click off of the person, click back onto them, because sometimes that's all it takes to bring it back. As a producer on stage, I have to give off-stage instructions. Sometimes it's a part of my job.
One of the things that we haven't mentioned yet is that in many ways the purpose of faith is always involving some sort of future outcome. Greg talked about getting in his car. His faith in the car starting has nothing to do with this just one moment in time when the car starts. He's got to get somewhere. And the faith in the dollar isn't just that, when I buy that soda, I want to be able to consume sodas on a regular basis in the future. And so this faith in the money has something to do with the way we're trying to anticipate things as they will work out in the future. And I think that there's a sense in which even faith in whatever kind of God wouldn't make sense if people didn't believe that somehow this had an impact on the future. And that I can't imagine a religion being dogmatic about the existence of a deity where there wouldn't be any future time when this was ever relevant.
Yeah.
Unless they were talking about the past.
Pardon me again?
I'm sorry. Unless they were talking about something in the past that may not. Maybe the deity doesn't affect the future, directly, but because of things that this deity did in the past will affect the future, and
right. The past might be an example, and even beliefs about the past, just as beliefs about King Arthur might have to why the Commonwealth is such a wonderful thing, and what have you. But I because of this, there's something about faith that is always that always represents an object that takes place in another time than right now. That makes it in some ways a little bit loosey-goosey and can therefore be a slippery slope and irresponsible.
Yeah, I would say that most bodies of faith are based on things that, whether true or not, happened in the past. But you're really getting the wheels turning in my head tonight, Bob, because I asked myself, is there an example of a body of faith that is the reverse, that is about things in the future? I would say that some good science fiction does that. We see a lot of technological results today that was driven by the imagination of science fiction writers of the past. Another thing that you caused me to think about was that it seems like faith is necessary for this reason. that there are people in this world who are visionaries. They have they have a vision for the future that may be positive or negative. Hopefully positive, because that's when this becomes useful. Because not everybody in this world is a visionary, at least not on the scale in which I'm speaking. In fact, most people are not on a visionary on a global scale. And in order for visionaries to move their vision forward, it takes faith.
Yeah. You know, in my own personal life, the faith that I have in myself is although it's been worked out by my experience in the past, the truth is my faith in myself has more to do with the person. I mean, these days, I don't think it was always this, but these days, the faith I have in myself has to do with the person I am becoming, not the person I have been. So that I actually have more faith than what I've personally demonstrated or earned yet. I see myself in a trajectory of growth. As a theist, I find so much trouble and dissonance in the past that I got to say that I don't believe in the gods of the past. That there's a sense in which it's an inarticulate, undefined. I don't know what it's going to be, and I don't feel that it's even required to.
I think I can explain that, or at least from my perspective, I think I can explain why that is. I think that, as with previous cultures, they had their gods that fulfilled, for lack of a better word, the parts of our understanding of reality that we can't explain. The god of, say, the Aztecs or the Norse or whoever, they looked at how they understood the world, and their gods ended up being sort of a place filler for, like, money. It ended up just arising as just a concept that's based on paper and metal, but it ended up being a way, a method, a social construct, if you will, to explain parts of each of those cultures that needed to be fleshed out.
I hear what you're saying, but I would disagree in this way. I don't think that the religions of the past were trying to explain things that they couldn't explain. I think that the religion was an explanation, and they didn't see that it needed any explanation. I don't think that they came across things and go, "Oh, what's this? Huh? Oh, I know. It must be God." I don't think that's how it happened.
Well, Bob, I think it's an organic process.
Well, yeah, exactly. And
that doesn't
think
mean that it's not an explanation of the source that he's referring.
Yeah, but the way, when we talk about it that way, we make it sound like that was the motivation, where really it's just the dynamic.
No, if you interpreted that, that's not what I meant, because I don't think that things like religions crop up because people want them to. I think they crop up because they need to be cropped up. There is a functionality. There's an empty hole that needs to be filled by something that works.
And so historically, they have to be. Historically, they're going to be ignorant.
Right, and
that is the reason why I think that I've come to a point where, I used to be a fundamentalist Christian, and there came a day when my honesty just couldn't let that work for me. But it didn't necessarily destroy all my sense of God. But I certainly abandoned the fact that even I understand this, that anybody's ever understood it, or that it's even necessary to understand.
And now that, I think, is something we should talk about more, Bob.
Yeah, but I mean, what I'm saying is I've abandoned the God of the past. What did you have in mind, Greg?
Specifically, what has changed about your faith, I think, is a very significant factor, because I get incredibly frustrated every time I listen to anybody talk about faith, because it is a huge ball of equivocations. Sorry, I'm muting my other computer. I run into, well, faith is trust, faith is hope, faith is, the money will work, the car is going to start.
Equivocations of what, though?
That is not, those are all versions of faith. They're all different kinds of faith, but I certainly think that they are words or situations in which the word faith is used, but that does not make them same aspects of different aspects of the same thing. I think that faith has different usages. It is not necessarily the word faith has different usages. It's not necessarily that faith itself is all of these different things.
No,
So
but-
when we talk
but
about how your
basically-
faith has changed, you said that you lost a lot of that stuff that you used to believe, right?
Correct. Yes, definitely.
That's what I'm talking about when I say faith. The stuff that you used to believe.
The creed. Yeah. Now,
Not necessarily just the creed.
the
Because you
theology.
do still have some amount of faith.
I've got a great
There's
example
something-
about this. If you'd like, I've got a great example about this within the current
Yes.
state of Christianity. It was justified that the Bible supported slavery 200 years ago. That was understood that it supported slavery. But now Christianity is more focused on the love and treatment of other human beings as equals, and that you should be decent to everyone. But at the time, they needed that. It meant the same, a different thing than what we accept now. And I'm just basically talking about the way you're describing it, Bob. That you, it's more about what you need your faith to do to make sense. What you need your worldview to do to make sense.
I don't want to take away from
Sense
that,
is the
Matthew.
thing
That's
I'm
not
even
really
worried
what I
about.
was.
I don't.
referring
Yeah, I don't know that sense is a thing that I'm even worried about. In some ways, I'd say that the sense of it is too wonderful for me, and I think that the only thing I could do in attempting to make sense of it is speak gibberish.
I have to say that's not really what I was referring to. That is very much related to sort of dogma. I mean, and what you had mentioned, a creed, Bob. Those are related to faith. They are accepted on faith. I would say that they are, part. Once again, they
And
come
we end
about
up using
through
the word
faith.
faith as a way of kind of packaging it all in an identifiable set of regularities. Yeah.
I'd say faith is actually the process or the method by which people accept these things. So dogmas, creeds, beliefs about what does and does not exist, all of these things that are associated with religion and actually various other aspects of our lives, such as homeopathic medicine or conspiracy theories. In many ways, they are the same sort of a mechanism, the methodology of drawing conclusions. And that's what I'm referring to. Is so you lost a fair degree of your faith.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
And I think
Can I
that
challenge
is
that?
significant.
I wonder if I could challenge that, Greg.
Please do.
Yeah, I don't think that faith is ever a methodology, and I'm going to sort of flatten out some of these distinctions that we're making because we faith is often used to describe a very strong belief, a passionate belief. Sometimes it's used to describe hope or an aspiration or something like that, or a desire for an ideal or something like that. And sometimes it's just we use it to describe a warranted confidence. My sense of this is that what worries us about faith, the reason we sort of have all of these conversations about faith and whether, do atheists have faith and is science based on faith somehow, and is there a difference between this kind of faith and that kind of faith, it comes down to is we all have beliefs, and what we want as rational agents, as sort of responsible epistemic agents, is for the confidence that we have in our beliefs to scale with the evidence. We want to make sure that we have evidence and reasons for what we believe, and we want our confidence to reflect that. To be, if you have lots of reasons and good evidence, then that warrants a high degree of confidence in the belief. And I think what worries people who are not religious about the religious is they just seem to have this extraordinary confidence to what by our light seems so little evidence, such scant evidence. And I think that's really what goes on here. I think we all take things on faith every day, and I don't think there's a huge...
Ozzy, I'd have to
Yeah,
qualify.
And I think, but I'd also say that I think it's a lot of that is insecurity too. Many religious people are very jealous of you scientists who really have nailed an awful lot of stuff down, and so I think that some of that adamancy comes from a jealousy, to be honest with you.
Yeah,
Well,
and on the other side,
Ozzy,
Are you saying they're haters?
I wanted to say, though, that I think you said we all want to feel this justification for what we believe, and that it is based on sound evidence. But I've had plenty of conversations with people of faith that have very explicitly stated the exact opposite.
they're lying. I will say that they're lying. Everybody.
I would agree.
Everybody is desperate for reasons, which is why we have sometimes desperate apologetics. And we even have desperate apologists for science sometimes. People who just don't know enough about the philosophy of science sometimes will just confabulate, crazy epistemological principles and stuff like that. And of course, on the religious side, we see people just so hunger. It's sometimes referred to as epistemic hunger for reasons and evidence and arguments. And I think when people are backed in a corner sometimes, they will say, well, it doesn't matter to me. I don't care. But I think that is always a move born of desperation, and just they throw their hands up in the air and when they say that.
I agree. That dynamic that makes me
I would
agnostic.
disagree.
Yeah.
I would say that is true for the people who are fundamentalists and are really adhering to a specific and strong creed, but a lot of the more spiritual and the more deistic, I can't come up with the words that would fit all of them, but a lot of the more liberal believers that sort of God is a force, is something that I truly have a hard time believing that they're looking for evidence. I think that they're basing this entirely, almost at least, on a hope and a desire for it to be true.
No, I mean, talk to these people, press them, and you'll see they often allude to sort of feelings, and it's just that their standards of evidence are so far removed from what most of us would consider evidence. I mean, some people will try to sort of mine the Bible for historical facts. They'll appeal to the Shroud of Turin as proof of.
You're still though talking about people.
No, wait. I'm trying to get to the point. Okay, but then you have other people who believe in a sort of much more rarefied God, a much more abstract God, and they will talk about. They'll give you what they see as spiritual reasons. How they feel sometimes, a sense of awe. A certain sense of well-being, certain experiences they have in contemplative moments and meditative practices and stuff like that. I mean, they are simply availing themselves of a completely different standard of evidence, but they do have their reasons. Now, I think they're inadequate, of course, but I think it's not true that they're not hungry for reasons and evidence, and they will latch on to almost anything when they can find it. They're people who believe in souls, and they'll hear some urban legend about when you weigh a body seconds before it dies and weigh the same body seconds after it dies, it weighs, I don't know,
21
grams left, or some yeah. I mean, these kinds of fictions just sort of circulate and propagate because of this epistemic hunger, this desperation to justify their beliefs.
I think that when you, as you say, press a theist, and I've talked to thousands over the years, especially on YouTube in comment sections, that for a long that's all I really did in my free time was talk to theists through the internet, and it usually comes down to these functional issues of their faith in a God answers this question or that question, whether it's a need for there to be a purpose in life, a need for there to be something more to life than just the biological, a need for there to be justice. But there's usually a combination of some of these bigger questions in life that they just don't accept a more bleak explanation for things, and they need there to be something more beautiful, more personable, more loving out of life than just where the universe is going to die a heat death. Like William Lane Craig, that seems to be his underlying, from what I've heard of him, that seems to be his underlying reason for having faith, is that he doesn't.
That's what he says, but I don't think that's what he personally experiences.
Well, that's really the problem, though, isn't it, Bob? You don't really know when to take what they say on faith. How do you know what they're saying is actually true?
I think that Matthew's hitting it on the head here with what he's saying. This is really demonstrating what I was talking about with the people who aren't grasping for reasons in an evidentialist sense. I guess I should have qualified in that. There are plenty. Everybody has reasons for believing things, but the reasons are not even what they would consider evidence in many cases. That's what I think is true of a lot of the more spiritualist ones. Is it's not even necessarily a feeling, but more a desire or a fear of the alternative. Somebody who needs life to have a meaning needs to believe that they will live on after, and that their grandparents are still alive somewhere.
Or I think that's
that
really.
they will
I think
meet
that's
them
really.
But I'm curious, do you think that all people, no matter who they are, be theist or atheist or whatever, that don't you think that we all live our lives with a variety of standards of evidence, many of which are really quite bogus?
Yes, that's true, but there's a question of how much you're convinced that something is true based on that evidence as well.
Yeah, and this is one of the reasons why I
I
call myself an agnostic theist,
right?
Because I realize that the reasons that I have embraced a faith are very weak, and in fact so non-compelling that beyond my own desire to risk it, I can't really require it of anyone else. I do tell people that I have an ongoing, and have had since a child, an ongoing experience of this other presence about me. Now, that could be my biochemistry. It could be some genetic anomaly. I don't really know. In some sense, I don't even really care.
Gentlemen, we are running
to
the end of the show here. I want to take possibly even as much as 10 or 15 more minutes, but I want to focus on some of the people who have not input quite as much. That being, I believe, Christopher hasn't chimed in at all. I think we haven't heard very much from Tony. Also, Dr. Shook, I've seen you trying to jump in the conversation a few times. You just got to practice going like this, but about, and that'll rail right over the top of everybody. That's really good. I'm really good at interrupting.
I've heard some great points.
Oh,
so far,
Fabio,
so
we haven't heard it from at all. Why don't we begin with why don't we begin with you, since the camera's on you?
Oh well, I think perhaps I could just emphasize something that I've heard 3 or 4 people kind of get at. Let me connect a couple of dots. We want conviction to be proportional to evidence. That is to say, at least us pro-rationalists, we think it's good for humanity that it's okay to have very strong, devout beliefs, call them convictions, if you will, but we'd like them to be proportional to, sort of their reliability. That is to say, things could go in such a way that would cause you to alter your beliefs, at least potentially. But then Bob got talking about people who put their faith in things, and Greg made this point too, because they have deep needs. And here I think what we see is conviction not proportional to evidence, but proportional to anxiety. That is to say, what these people are doing, operating at a more emotional level perhaps, is that they want to put their conviction in something exactly as important and big enough that will make their anxieties as small as possible when they have been suffering from those existential anxieties. And this
Absolutely,
is a process. Yes. I wouldn't call it a method, but it's a brain process like everything else. But it largely bypasses a lot of our higher cognitive centers. It sort of goes straight to the heart. It goes straight to the amygdala because it suddenly gives us immense emotional relief if you're really willing to do it. And now we're of 2 minds. On the one hand, belief should be proportional to the evidence. On the other hand, we feel desperate to, diminish our anxieties. And there we are. It's the human condition. Some of us put our bets some way. Some of us put our bets another way. But in a way, it's like we're speaking 2 different languages because we want 2 very different things out of our convictions. And, we're kind of looking at each other in opposed camps, not really sure what to do with each other because each of our strengths is a weakness of the other one. Right? So the rationalists say, if only you would proportion your convictions to the evidence. Well, to the anxiety-ridden people, that's like the most irrelevant thing on the table you could possibly say to them because the evidence is what's causing all the immense anxieties They don't have enough evidence, and yet there they are still with their terrible dreads and fears and worries. On the other hand, that all seems so emotion-ridden, and it is, to us rationalists, that we don't feel like we can even really communicate. It's hard to perhaps sympathize unless we've really been there. It's a tough situation.
Are you mocking me because in spite of the fact that I walked away from Christianity, I prayed to Jesus during my vasectomy?
During my operation,
Even Christopher Hitchens
I
prayed
read
for heart.
philosophy, so to each his own. It diminished my anxiety.
Who else haven't we heard from? Fabio, can we hear from you?
Yeah, I'm sorry I haven't been too active, but I've been fascinated by the conversation, and besides the fact that it's 4 a.m. right here, so I'm a little bit, yeah. I don't know. I mean, I've really interesting concepts. There are a couple of them, and I've wrote down something, but most of them are just a repeat of what you already said. Just a couple of points which I think are interesting. In my opinion, faith is something that we deal with it every day of our lives. I mean, as someone else said, we have those faith in the social sense. We have faith that the fact that my car is going to start. There are a couple of things which in my opinion, are interesting. Is the first one is that when we usually talk, it's funny that when we say that you lose faith in something, you make it less credible. There is a sentence from Dante which says "Vedrai cose che tordien fede al mio sermone," which means you'll see things that will give away faith in what I'm going to say, and thus being that less credible. So we give importance to faith as a concept. It has measurable effects, like in the placebo effect, for example. And another point which I see in everyday life is that I was writing in the comments before, in Italy, the wedding ring, and the wedding has been called up as a good example of faith. It's actually called faith. We have to, so we have a material construct which we can identify a faith in something which eventually it can go catastrophically wrong, in case of a wedding. I don't know exactly what faith is. I have no problems in people having faith in something, because I think I have faith in a lot of things. I'm an ex-Catholic, so probably that's one of the issues. But still, I always found interesting that even if you don't have a religious faith, even if you have faith in something, it is human, I think, to try to bind this really strange concept, which can mean a lot of things, to material things, in order to actually identify it and see, and funnily enough, to see your faith, like in the wedding ring example. And I'm done.
Very good. Let's see.
That was the greatest closing ever.
Well, I had another sentence which was funny, but I know out. The closing one was a sentence from Feynman, which I love it. He said that science is a way to keep from fooling ourselves. And even if I agree with a lot of things that Feynman said, I personally agree that we kind of need a little bit of foolishness in our lives. You can't really go on believing in things which are true and proven, because it doesn't work that way.
No, the only problem in trying to use what you've decided is true to convince someone else that it's also true.
You're right, and this is the big issue. I mean, as I said, I have no problems with people having faith in something. It's the way they behave according to their faith which sometimes puzzles me. I mean, if you have faith in whatever you want, and you're not a good person, you don't behave in a social acceptable manner. I mean, I don't know if it's you or if it's the faith, but I mean, we can discuss about it, and there's something wrong,
So we are running against the clock here. I want to bring in somebody who just joined us recently. His name is Leo. Leo, I think you've been in the conversation long enough to kind of understand the context. Do you have anything to add? All right, maybe he's just a listener.
Is mic working?
All right. Okay. So with that being the case, does anybody else have any closing comments? Otherwise, I'm going to give it to Christopher
just
to
like
close.
to point out that Leo says he needs to type because his roommate is sleeping.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
All right. Well, this show doesn't work that way, Leo. I'm so sorry.
He has posted something in the chat that was
okay.
He
Very good.
felt that it was necessary to, or this would be appropriate time to talk about the dangers of confirmation bias, and that's. I wanted to make a closing that was related to that because I fired up a few people earlier this week by making a statement comparing apologetics to snake oil sales and theology to snake oil, and a fair amount of other terms that apparently upset a lot of people. But I had one of the points associated with that was that I feel that faith of the religious nature that we finally sort of narrowed down to what we were talking about at the end of the show is a dangerous thing. And I think it's specifically for the reasons that Ozzy and Dr. Shook mentioned about the kinds of evidence that people are basing their conclusions upon and the kind of conclusions that people draw. And why I think that process, be it a method or just a process, is something that is extremely dangerous in the results that it can produce, not necessarily something that it does produce. And I think that most manifestations of it are not particularly dangerous or harmful. But man, is that a big, ugly door to open if you don't know what might walk through it.
Right. Christopher,
Sounds
did
like
you...
a bit of anxiety, though.
Uh-oh. What did you say, Bob?
I said, it sounds to me like the other side of that anxiety. Which I find kind of paradoxical and interesting. Yeah, I even could even relate to what Dr. Shook was saying when he was even talking about that. I've known people who seem to have a faith that is an attempt to alleviate the anxiety, and I think that for me, at least personally, that's one of the reasons why that fundamentalism died, because I didn't see how that served that purpose. I couldn't personally attach myself to faith for those reasons. It just, I don't know. I just don't have that gene in me. I guess I don't know what it is. It just didn't connect for me.
Well, I would like to propose that I'm going to be jamming out on a post-show hangout. So if anybody wants to hear why Greg Bray is wrong, I suggest that everybody come and join.
Doesn't watch this show.
Because we're trying to wrap it up. That's my tease. We're trying to wrap it up here, and I'm trying to bring people along. So,
Christopher, I wanted to hear
NCG.
I wanted to hear from you on this topic. You have said 0 on this show, and it is 9:20 now, and I'm not going to close the show until we hear something from you.
All right. Well, what I have to say is I'd rather walk to school than eat my lunch. My point was I was waiting, like Greg was, for this to kind of organically move its way towards religious faith, and I was kind of hoping that by Bob and I talking about the definitions of faith, that we would have kind of laid a kind of groundwork that wouldn't have to be covered in the hangout. But apparently, people have lots of opinions about what the definitions of faith are. So I guess to keep it pithy, I'll just say that I celebrate the diversity of definitions that go along with faith and think that all of them are necessary in one way, shape, or form.
Christopher, do you think that religious faith is always destructive?
No.
Do you think that it is mostly destructive?
No.
Can you expand on that, please?
I think that religious faith is personal, and when people, by even asking the question of somebody who believes in God to show evidence for God, you've already stepped into the territory of, well, that's none of your business. That's what I think about this. I think that faith is personal when it comes to religious faith. But if the person is saying, well, I have this faith and you're going to hell, buddy, and I'm going to tell you 12 ways that, why your current worldview is wrong, and I'm not saying you shouldn't defend your worldview when it's being offended, but in the cases that it's not, it's none of your business.
A couple of terms were brought up by Greg Bray, and I wanted to ask you about this, Dr. Shook, this evening before we close the show. Greg stated that theology is snake oil, and he also compared those apologists, namely those who explain their faith, to be charlatans. Would you agree with Greg?
Oh, not in general, no. I can't agree at all. Maybe a very narrow definition of theology is going on, tightly connected to a very narrow definition of religious and an even narrower definition of faith. We've heard some narrow definitions as well as some broad definitions. But theology traditionally and to this day has been sort of the broadest term available to religious people to signify their efforts to explain and describe, and where necessary, defend their faith. But it's mostly in the explaining and describing that theology does its contributions to culture, because religiosity goes on. It doesn't seem that that's going to come to an abrupt halt despite new atheism. And religious people, of course, invest in their ideals, their visions of community, the kind of culture that they want. And that's a rich social experience. They've invested in a huge amount of trust in each other to build religious communities that make contributions to their civilizations, rightly or wrongly, however we may judge them from an external perspective. But theology is the effort to describe what they are trying to accomplish with each other and with the society that they're living in. And thank goodness they're doing it. Otherwise, we'd really wonder what they're up to. Right? But, theology at its best can very eloquently describe the religious life, both collectively and personally. And theology is where you can discriminate the better and worse forms of religious life. Now, secular people are perfectly capable of pointing the finger and condemning plenty of it. But if you want religious people to step back, reevaluate, say, where are we on our journey? Are we headed where we were planning? What's working, what's not? That's called theology. That's one of the essential functions of theology, at least when theology is working well. So, you can't just, blanketly condemn theology as if it only had a very narrow vision. Quite the opposite. It has a very, very broad mission. It's absolutely essential for religion to be able to communicate what's going on, not just to the outside world and to the unbelievers. That's just a secondary byproduct. It's mostly there to explain what's going on to the religious people. And to connect that up with what I was saying earlier, if religious people themselves don't know what's going on, why everybody's doing it, and what everybody expects to get out of it, then it becomes blind dogma, it becomes an ideology, and it becomes very exploitable. So theology, when it's working well, is designed to try to minimize those things, not maximize them. Oh, and I just laid it out there. No reaction.
No, it's a big difference between ritual and theology.
Yeah, I really enjoyed your explanation. But one of the things that I wanted to make clear tonight is the New Covenant group is not about taking those of theology and saying, hey, listen, if you have a theology, it's all about snake oil. It's not about saying those who want to explain their theology or beliefs, you're a charlatan. I wanted to go on record tonight as stating that that's not what the New Covenant group is about. The New Covenant group is about accepting people, actually loving people, respecting the conversation, etc. And we have so many ideas, and I like what Bob said tonight, as faith, in a sense, changes. And I think the Apostle Paul had the idea that faith, in a sense, gives us the courage to move beyond our current notions And for this reason and others, it continues to change. And so we see that faith is very transitional, and I don't think that faith was only hooked in a religious notion, but it's also attached in so many things in our lives. And theology hasn't always been just a religious mindset. It's like the Olympic circles in a sense. If we can look at it, we can see that theology is very much mixed in philosophy and other disciplines and even the arts. And so when you look at the Jews and how they practice theology, it's all about artistic expression. It's all about something that really brings meaning in relationships and things of that nature. And so when someone starts making these statements that theology is snake oil, and those who want to explain it, it's just a charlatan tactic or something like that, that really that doesn't set well with me. And I just wanted to go on record as stating that, Greg.
Well, I can certainly appreciate that. I did want to qualify that the theology I view as the snake oil, the medicine that doesn't actually do what it claims to do. The snake oil salespeople are the apologists. There's a difference between
but
specifically.
You were calling all theology snake
Yeah, you said all
exactly.
theology.
And so, I mean, be consistent with your terms, but when you say that theology
I just
is snake
clarified
oil.
that exactly. That the theology is what I'm calling the snake oil. The apologetics is the peddling of the snake oil.
All
That is the
apologetics
sales.
isn't one and the same. Much apologetics, apologists simply try to explain. I don't know if you know of R.C. Sproul, but he's not one who wants to get into a polemic. He's simply one who wants to explain. He enjoys history. He's a marvelous person. And you have a lot of wonderful theologians out there who want to explain X, Y, and Z, and much of it is in the context of philosophy. Much of it is in the context of the arts. And to say that these people are charlatans, like William Lane Craig, Dr. Shook, do you think he's a charlatan?
Oh, I don't think William Lane Craig is a charlatan. Much of the theology that he does helps to elaborate a view of Christianity for Christians that's probably 10 times more interesting and sophisticated than what they'll ever get out of their hometown minister. So I don't begrudge him. When he, devolves just into witnessing as if that had
when he
the
debates
same
an empty
academic,
chair.
If his witnessing on stage seems to take advantage of his academic stature, when really those two things are very different. I have a problem with that, and that smells suspicious, and I don't like that. If you're going to witness, say that you're witnessing, not dress it up in academics.
Okay, but isn't it true across the board that not just theists are playing the game to make money in a sense? I think there are various people, and we've talked about this off record. And so I don't think that it's good to simply call people charlatans or people who have a particular study. Not all people of theology actually believe in God, by the way. Theology is all across the board. And to call people who study this is all about snake oil, I think that was a bit poor. And Greg, what do you say to that?
I disagree. I think that there's plenty of people who very legitimately research and swear to the power of homeopathy or crystal therapy or Reiki massage.
But you made a broad category
pressure.
of theology, Greg.
I did indeed, and I have
to
to admit I'm limited by my phenomenology here, my experience with theology, theologians, and apologetics. I can only describe it as I am aware of it, and I am always open to correction if people would like to offer evidence. I even stated that in the
Greg, if your experience is limited, then why would you make a blanket statement like that?
Because that's my opinion, as based on the experience that I've had.
So what you're saying, those who would advocate a theology, you think that everything that you've heard up unto this point is actually snake oil, and those who try to explain it are charlatans? And that would include me, by the way.
Well,
it would include me, by the way, too. As a professional atheist, I find myself having to explain in a sympathetic and clear way more theology than, again, folks have ever heard in their hometowns. So, I always take the view that more explaining is better than less explaining, and we should all try to avoid stereotypes, perhaps.
I really I feel well, frankly, at this point, I feel a bit ambushed by this. But
why would that be, Greg?
I'm sorry?
Why would that be?
Just that it was thrown onto the end of a hangout here. But since we're going down that road, I guess I can't say that I, again, have experience or I even understand the terms theology or apologetics in the same ways that you do. I mean, if there's one thing that today exposed, or the conversations that we had today exposed, is the nuances of language, specifically when it comes around to religious or terminology that is associated with religious practices and background. So, I mean, Dr. Shook saying just now that he explains a fair amount of theology to people. I think that there is a difference between the academic and even what he discussed about theology earlier. There's a difference between the academic study of theology as it is, or as it is believed, and the religious study of theology as an attempt to understand God as it is, or as he is, or as they are. And there's sort of a fundamental disconnect anytime we talk about something that can be studied in anthropological or academic sense, and something that is studied in a very religious sense. Also, the term charlatan or snake oil salesman has far more to do. That was initially brought up with regards to William Lane Craig, and with regards to every apologist I have ever seen in a debate that is going to try to give evidence of God, or try to advocate for a particular religious position. Because I think that, at least in my experience here, it's been based on things that can only be understood as dishonest discourse and rhetoric. Because I think that they're
let me slow you down
very
there, Greg.
different.
Let me just ask one question first here. I just have one very quick question.
Go ahead.
Does intent, Greg, does intent matter in what let's use the term snake oil then. If let's say, to use an actual metaphor of that, does the snake oil salesman that's actually standing on his cart, hawking his snake oil to the town that he pulled into, if he genuinely believes that the snake oil will cure whatever he's saying it will, do you differentiate between the people who believe that the snake oil will actually help someone with those who are just doing it as a manipulation to make money? Or are you just talking about that since they're selling the product, period, they're automatically doing something wrong?
Well, I actually would have to say that the selling a product that you very strongly believe in, even if you are misguided, is a noble effort to go about.
So being a snake oil salesman isn't necessarily a bad thing. Then,
right, not necessarily a bad thing by intent. I will also have to say that is the distinction between just a snake oil salesman and a charlatan. That a charlatan, I think, by definition, is somebody who knows at least that they are being dishonest in their approach, even if they do believe a certain amount of what they are saying.
So how can we tell the difference between someone who genuinely believes and someone who is just manipulating the audience?
I think Ozzy made a couple of great points in the chat here regarding that. Ozzy, did you want to say those, or should I?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, really, part of what I was saying, I don't know if Matthew was sort of taking on what I was saying, or if he came to the same conclusion. But I mean, as I see it, charlatan's a really strong word. To my mind, it's not merely someone who's selling something that doesn't work or that is ineffective. It's knowingly selling something that you don't even think works, and that's a real charlatan. Now, but I think someone like William Lane Craig believes what he's selling. I just don't think he believes many of his arguments. I think he's much too sophisticated, much too erudite and intelligent and knows too much philosophy to actually believe some of the arguments he pushes. He just relies far too much on appeals to intuition and appeals to emotion in his argumentation. I mean, I have never heard of a philosopher argue this way. I mean, a proper academic philosopher in a university setting. I've never heard a philosopher argue that way. And it's because he has this other agenda. He's not merely trying to persuade people rationally. He's trying to win souls. And
he's also trying to be a hero to the faith.
Well, yes, no. I mean, he's trying to sort of to produce a kind of a veneer of intellectual respectability to shore up people's faith, so that they feel, people who are desperate for reasons. No, you're the rational ones. Don't worry. Historians agree with us. That there was an empty tomb and stuff like that. I mean, he sort of sells a lot of evidentialist apologetics to reassure people. But I don't think I think Charlton's a bit strong. I think he's a dishonest apologist. But I don't think all apologists are dishonest. But I think that there's something wrong with apologetics in general. That is, I think a lot of the apologetics out there that is out to help convert, to evangelize, that type of apologetics, and not all apologetics has that aim, but that type of apologetics very often is is engaged in reverse engineering premises that will lead to dogmas that they already hold. There's no open-ended, disinterested pursuit of truth. There's no sense of following the evidence where it leads. They really are starting with their dogmas and trying to confect an argument based on premises that they've reverse engineered to get them to those dogmas. And that, I think, is an intellectually dishonest pursuit. But to some degree, we all do this ourselves, right? I mean, this is something that we all sort of have to purge ourselves of. But I think one of the liabilities of religious faith is that the stakes are so high, and I think the evidence so weak, that people are desperate for reasons, and it's imperative. The stakes are so high. Hell and heaven are at stake here. People are very strongly motivated to do these things, to resort to dishonest arguments, or arguments that if they heard them from another person of another faith, they would find unconvincing. So I think that's a problem. But I think it is too strong to say that all apologetics is dishonest, and certainly that all theology is dishonest. I mean, theology. I'm going to echo Dr. Shook here. Theology really is just trying to make sense of your religious claims, trying to make sense of them, make them fit with the rest of what you know about your sort of the mundane world, the political world. You're just trying to make sense of your beliefs and make it consistent. And this, I think, is a good thing. Any religious person should be trying to do that, should be engaged in trying to sifting through their belief set and looking for inconsistencies and trying to make sense of it. Where it's dicey is it converge on just rationalization, confirmation bias and strongly motivated reasoning can intrude. But I mean, that's true if you have a secular outlook. I mean, I find myself doing it. It gets pointed out to me. It got recently pointed out to me actually. I mean, this is something we all do. So I don't think it's right to say that they're all snake oil salesmen and all that. But there certainly are some out there. Without naming names. I'll be happy to name names if anyone cares to know what I think some of them are. But I mean, there's plenty of them out there.
Did you have a comment, Dr. Shook?
Oh, no.
Okay.
I've said my piece.
Well, the reason that I brought this up at the end of the show is because you stated something about your comment, Greg. I would have never said anything on this show unless you would have brought it up, because I've got other things to do. I just don't think it's healthy to try to bring up certain terms that make people feel so condemned. I think people of theology have been in condemnation for too long, and they don't need to be condemned by anyone. And I'm including atheists. And I think if atheists want to win in any sense of the word, and bringing people to the table of discussion in a rational sense, they need to learn how to be respectful and kind. Would you agree?
Yes and no. I don't think it's disrespectful or unkind to use the terms that I did. I agree that you're correct that we need to be respectful and kind to people. So in that sense, it is yes, and an unequivocal yes, but it's a no regarding the terminology I used.
Well, the reason I keep pursuing this is because I've had so many theists call me and say, are we going to continue to be thrown under the bus? We're being told that everything that we hold to be true is snake oil, and if we try to explain it, it's, we're charlatans. And so we want theists to come to the table of discussion, come on these shows. We don't want just atheists. We want atheists and theists to come together. That's the idea of the New Covenant group. And so hopefully we can move on.
Can I respond to that with,
Certainly.
With one quick thing is that atheists, that we get a bit of a reputation for this firebrand atheism or for offensive statements and different things that we come about and say. I really have to say that I think that is exaggerated in many ways, and it's based on a degree of privilege coming from the fact that it is just such a rarity in the lives of especially Christians in the United States, because it is such a strongly Christian nation. Atheists worldwide are extremely persecuted against and are subject on a regular basis, even within the United States, to far more severe language. What I stated was just an honest representation of how I view things, and it was in no way intended to be a personal attack or a direct condemnation of any particular person's understanding. As I said, I am always open to somebody presenting evidence against what I have to say, or even making a reasoned argument as to why that is. Now, for example, today I am changing my position on theology because I am recognizing it as a much broader scope than what the word applied to in my mind. So I was specifically considering theology in the religious sense of trying to understand God and through the creeds, the dogmas, and the contexts of your particular tradition. And that I view, I believe it was David in that particular thread that brought it up and saying, I view that as a subject without an object, which should be obvious. I'm an atheist. I don't believe that there is a God. So by reasonable extrapolation from where I stand, that is a subject without an object. And if that is shocking to anybody, they don't understand the condition of atheism.
Well, one of the things that
I don't want to offend people when I say things like this, but I'm also I have to say things as I feel them, and as I have to be honest about these things. And I just, in much the same way, you, I'm sure, have been given plenty of flack for saying things like Jesus was murdered. Hell is no less than a lie. Various other things that I know you've been quoted at and have become sort of even taglines for you, and I'm sure they have really sincerely pissed off a fair amount of people, but
it's true.
I view that as a good thing, because what you've done is spoken things as you see them without any sort of censorship based on their sensibilities, and people can either come to you from that or they can walk away from the table. But at the end, at least you have your integrity that there was not something that you felt should be said, and you chose not to say it because it would keep people happy.
Can I just add a little tail end onto that?
Yes, but let me make a statement, because I really want to bear my heart here. When Dr. Krause was on the other night, I was just overwhelmed with joy as a theist, because I wanted to listen to the best of physics. And there are a lot of theists out there who are finally opening up their ears And I'm just trying to encourage people to have just something within themselves to say that we can rise, keep rising above our past patterns of humanism and model a better humanism. Respect people to the point where they will open up their ears like they are today. In 2013, people are listening. And when you give a person like Dr. Krause a chance to speak on physics, it changes minds. And when you listen to people like Dr. Shook, it changes minds. And when I listen to Ozzy speak, wow, I'd rather listen than speak because I'm learning. And there are many, many theists like myself and Bob Graves who continue to change because we're listening. And so I'm saying that terms like snake oil and charlatan, those kind of terms simply don't need to be used in this kind of context. But I can understand why you want to be very, very specific and say, hey, this is what I think to be true, yada, yada, yada. And I know that sometimes it takes a very bold confrontation to make a point, and I applaud that, and you've done that very well, Greg. Many times you've done an excellent job on teaching evolution. But my point tonight was to make clear, that is, since you brought up the point or the matter that took place on our wall, I wanted to make it very clear to the theist, we're not here to bash you. And make it clear to atheists, we're not here to bash you. We love atheists and theists alike, and we will continue to fight hard to keep the integrity of that in the New Covenant group. You wanted to say something, Matthew?
Yes, thank you, and I applaud what you said. I'd like to make a distinction about something that I've noticed in especially the atheist community over the years, but it's of course universal. It's not just atheists, but there's a tendency to have discussions about things that you hold to be not just true, but part of your character, part of who you are. So when your beliefs, your understanding of reality are so invasive, so important to you that they become part of your identity. Instead of just saying you're a man, saying you're a Christian man, or saying, just as an example. But we have to keep in mind that when we're talking to people with different worldviews that are so diametrically opposed to our own, that there's the only real way to talk to each other is to respect the discourse itself. Then
exactly,
it's easier to understand that when someone criticizes something you believe or something you've said in the past or someone that you agree with, they're not criticizing you as a person. They're not saying that you are a bad person just because what you're saying you believe is bad, or something that you are trying to convince someone else that you believe is bad. That's no reflection on the individual themselves. That is just talking about the belief. It's only when you take that down and start slinging mud against people individually, talking about their character, then that is when the problems arise. But when you're talking about concepts and talking about these very important topics that we've been talking about, you're not talking about the person. And I think that that's something that has to be taken into account no matter what subject of faith or belief that you're talking about.
With the element of indexicality here, if there is something that you perceive to be just blatantly false, there are ways of saying that can be clear. There are also ways of saying it that can be charged terms. And the need for clarity and honesty in expressing what you see does not really require that it be done in a charged manner or in an uncharged manner. We have a lot of words that we can use when we express the concepts that we have. There's perhaps some things that I could say about certain theologies. There's some things that I could say about certain people who don't believe anything, that I would want to find some way of being clear that didn't necessarily push buttons. And so I would want to say that I don't think that telling it like you see it, I don't think you did tell it like you saw it. I think you told it like you pushed it.
That's a good point. We are at the end of the show.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
If I was the producer off stage, I would be throwing all kinds of interesting hand symbols at you. right now, but as it is, Sean is throwing those hand symbols. Christopher Maute, do you still feel like doing a hangout after the hangout? Okay, very good.
Yes.
Well, I hope that everybody will be a part of it. In the meantime, Dr. Jones, did you want to go around one more time and have everybody make a closing statement?
Since you make fun of me all the time, I don't believe so. But we have a lot of fun here in the studio, and we respect all of our guests. And please understand that if we have a little bit of tension in our talk, it's not intended to be against anyone. And we're trying to find resolve. We're trying to move forward together somehow. And sometimes it's difficult, but this is the thing that we have to embrace. The journey is not always easy. And so let's keep moving forward. Good night.